Gloria Donahue with Nana's Cookery. I am so excited today. Let me show you something before we start our recipe, which is going to be for bread pudding. But look at this, business card. My grandchildren came, it's upside down, my producer tells me. I'm crazy enough. My grandchildren came to visit me yesterday, and as a surprise, they brought me a whole box of business cards so I can really harass people everywhere and tell them to watch Nana's Cookery. But I'm so excited, and it was such a nice gift. Are you kidding? It's business cards. I was going to talk to Tom about that's what we did.
Yeah, she was dying for.
But I still look old.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. I'm going to put them in my wallet. Today I'm going to do bread pudding. If we were to go to a restaurant and they said they had this fancy 3-layer torte with whipped cream and nuts and everything, or bread pudding, my husband would probably choose the bread pudding. He loves it, but he also loves it plain. He does not like it with raisins. He feels that overwhelms the dish. But he does like some crusts on his bread. And you'll find that as a cook, baker in your house, you'll end up doing what your family really likes, how they enjoy it. So this is a bread pudding that we're going to bake, and then there's going to be a sauce. Now the full recipe calls for a 1.5 quart dish. And that's what I'm going to do because the producer is here with us today and he'll have dinner. But if it were just the two of us, I would make 2/3 of that recipe and put it in a quart dish. And that's something you can always think about when you're cooking. Something calls for a 13×9 pan, you only want half. Use an 8-inch square, it'll be fine. The same thing if something says an 8-inch square, double it in a 9×13 and you'll be fine. If you'd like to, maybe you can mark some of your dishes underneath with tape or with a marker as to exactly what this holds, particularly something that's going to go in the oven. Because you may have something round, you may not want something that's too high. It's not just the volume of what it holds, it's also the configuration of the pan as to what you want to do. But this is a 1.5 quart dish, which I have lightly greased with butter, and that's what we're going to use. I'm going to read you the ingredients because I don't want to miss anything. But I did heat 2 cups of half and half. It said you could also use whole milk. I don't have whole milk. I have like a 2%. But I did have half and half, and I used that, and it gives it a certain richness. So there was 2 cups of half and half, which I heated to scald. And to scald means it gets little bubbles around the edge and starts to have a film. And then I added a 1/4 cup of butter, and I stirred the butter in, and I let the whole thing just sit and cool down, and this is what it looks like. Now, in the mixing bowl, I'm going to take 2/3 of a cup of white sugar. It says you can also use brown sugar, but honestly, I always use white sugar in this recipe. So that's what I'll use. You could do differently if you wanted. And it calls for 2 teaspoons of cinnamon and 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg in there. And it calls for 3 eggs. And you know my rule on eggs. I always break them individually and make sure I don't get any shell in there. So I'm putting that in there. And this definitely is the end of this bottle of vanilla. But it is my last one. And I need a teaspoon. Does call for a teaspoon. That's correct. Always want to make sure. There we go. And now I'm going to mix that up. I'm going to break those eggs up. I want to get the other ingredients in there. Now it says you can use French bread. I don't really use French bread for this. I use regular bread. And I also use the crust because that's what my husband likes. I don't tear it. I simply cut it just the same way as I do a stuffing. I just maybe pile 2 or 3 pieces on top, cut it up. So I need 3 cups of bread, and I'm going to put the bread in the lightly greased container. So that's 3 cups of bread, and it's basically cubed. Now I've got this all mixed, and now I'm going to slowly pour in the milk and the melted butter. Now again, if you like raisins, you can put raisins in it. But since my husband doesn't like them, I don't do it. Now it's just a nice mixture, and we're going to pour that over the breadcrumbs. Or I'm sorry, the cubed bread, not breadcrumbs. And we're going to put it in an oven at 350 for 45 to 50 minutes. So I'm just going to pour it over. And let me just make sure that everything is wet. I want to make sure that all the bread has been dampened by this. And that's funny with that cinnamon and nutmeg that it seems to be clumping, which it does not usually do. But there we go. And boy, will this look different when it comes out. But the breadcrumbs are all wet. And basically, for people who don't know, a bread pudding is basically a custard with bread. There's bread in there, and then I've made a milk and egg custard around it, and then it's going to bake in the oven. And let me see again, that's a little predominance there of a spice. Let's shake that up a little bit. And I'm going to put it in the oven, and you'll look at it when it comes out. Here's our bread pudding, fresh out of the oven, and I'm going to make a creamy sauce to go on top of it. You won't eat it this hot, and it will sink as it cools. You do want to eat it lukewarm, but you don't want to eat it this hot right out of the oven. I usually try to do it so it comes out of the oven maybe as we sit down to eat our dinner, and then it's cooled off enough to eat a little later. But I'll make the sauce and we'll get back. Thanks. The bread pudding is out, the bread pudding is cooling, and now we're making a sauce. And I should always follow the directions that I give everybody else. I haven't always made this sauce, we just made it the last time and we really liked it. And if I had read more carefully at the bottom of the recipe, it said if you're going to use the sauce, instead of a half a cup sugar in your bread pudding, use a third of a cup. Well, I put in a half a cup, folks, because I didn't read very well. So now we're doing the sauce that goes on top. It calls for 2 cups of whole milk. I don't have whole milk in the house, I have 2%. So what I usually do is then either add some cream or some butter just to raise the butter fat. You just can't say like, oh, I have skim milk, I'll use skim milk instead of cream. No, because the fat in that substance is what helps it cook well and be the consistency that you want. So I just added a little bit more butter, but it also calls for 2 tablespoons of butter, 1/3 of a cup of granulated sugar, a teaspoon of vanilla, a tablespoon of flour, and a pinch of salt. Now I've put it all in this. I happen to have this little cooking thing, but you could put it in a little saucepan and you put it over the stove and you let it boil for 3 to 4 minutes, and then you set it aside for 5 minutes, and then you pour it over the bread pudding when you have it for dessert. So I'm going to do that now, and I'll show you when it's done. Here's the finished sauce ready to go. It says boil it for 3 to 4 minutes, stirring it constantly. Don't ask me how I know that you should stir it constantly. We're going to let it cool for a bit and then pour it over our bread pudding. As always, it's been a pleasure to have you come into the kitchen. I love hearing from you, and have a great day. Bye-bye.